Good evening, workshoppers. It's another Wednesday. It's another episode. This one was probably going to be a little bit short, much like last episode was. But I decided to go through and just at least drop in with a season 20 status check to see where we're at. We're, going in here now. Been we've had plenty of time with season 20. I know a lot of people are going through and asking about season 21. When's the PTR and stuff like that. And I'll be getting to that one in a little bit. We've had not a lot of news, in between these past two episodes, but it makes sense. There's not a whole lot going on, besides, of course, the whole COVID-19 situation. But I myself, I've gotten back into World of Warcraft because some of my friends were going through and have been playing with the rep buff that they had, and they were going through and talking about Shadowlands, and then I got Shadowlands Alpha, and I think I played the Shadowlands Alpha for a couple days, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is pretty fun. I'm enjoying this so far. I really like the aesthetics. So I started playing retail, and then Red Bull has started up these weekly StarCraft 2 competitions, and they've been getting a lot of really big name players to go through. I think it's actually partially Raynor is the kind of the show match that they do in every single one of the games there, and it's been fun, and it makes me think that this is prime 2011, where I would just no life World of Warcraft with StarCraft 2 competitions on the NESL and stuff like that. And it's taking me back to a different time in my life. It's really funny how things have gone. But also, speaking of World of Warcraft, there is one little tiny bit of how WoW ties into Diablo. Earlier this week, Ian Hazakostas, the game director for World of Warcraft, did a live Q&A over on Twitch. And one of the answers that he gave, in particular about how development of Shadowlands has been impacted by COVID-19, I felt could actually, be translated over to Diablo for a little bit, because it gives us a little bit of an inside look at how things are going on in the development teams over there. And they asked, will the expansion be delayed? And it said, after a 1-week adjustment period in March, the team is now able to work comfortably from home and stay safe. Still plan on a 2020 release. So that makes me think, as I was going and talking about on the last episode, that with something like Diablo 3, there wouldn't really be too much of an issue for them, transitioning to working at home. And with it seems that it only took them 1 week to transition from the in-house to in-house development. And so that means we should probably be getting that season 20 PTR right about on time, if not, delayed a week. So while I was expecting that we probably would start getting a little bit of an inkling of the PTR in time for the next episode, which would be mid-May, probably is going to be another 2 episodes, and we might not hear anything about the PTR until the end of May, and the PTR launching sometime in June instead of pushing that up about a week. At least that's what my expectations are. Of course, grain of salt. This is just some theory crafting, spitballing, all other types of stuff. But yeah. So we could potentially have by the end of next month our first look at the season 21 PTR, and what changes might be included in there. Other than that, the only other big thing to happen within the realm of Diablo 3 is, of course, you've been playing it for a couple of weeks now, because they instituted a double goblin buff just a couple days after the last episode. In which, so now, most goblins are all doubled. There are certain ones, like the Insufferable Miscreant and such, that are not, nor, goblin shrines or the goblin levels on rifts. Those things don't, but anything that you find out in the world. And I hope that if you have not yet completed your full collection of the Menagerous Goblin, all the little pets, now's the perfect time, because any Menagerous Goblin that you find will be doubled, and so you get 2 pet drops instead of 1. We'll have the time of the farming, or if it's something that you never really spent or dedicated any time to, well, now, might incentivize you a little bit more in order to go through and do that. If you're going through, playing through the season, just having the double goblin buff, while you're going through and, say, running bounty mats and such, will help, give you a little bit extra materials here and there, maybe a little bit extra gems. There's not really too much of a reason to want to go through and farm them. You don't double rainbow goblins, so you don't have double chances in order to go through and get into the Whimsyshire, and then you can only have the 1 portal up at a time for the vault, or for the cow level, the secret cow level. And if you have the secret cow level up, that doesn't close, so you can only have, once it spawns and you're pretty much done. So, it's in some aspects it's just like a nice little boost, but for those that don't have the full pet collection, that one is actually going to be pretty big, and I definitely highly recommend going for that. If it's something that you're missing a couple, or you never really worked on it in the first place, it gives you a reason to go back in and play, right? And then outside of future or current content for Diablo 3, we also had a little bit of like an impromptu Q&A over on Reddit with Trent Kanunga, who was one of the senior concept artists for Diablo 3 when it went and first launched. Now this was from almost 2 weeks ago. It was just popped on Reddit. He actually created a couple of different posts, like one for Burning Crusade, some League of Legends stuff, as well as for Diablo. And, he answered a whole bunch of questions, all about the game, and his development and his time in there, going through talking about, working as a development artist, working on like the armor sets. He did like 75% of all of the armor sets in the game. And he talked about like some of the challenges that he had while going through and doing that. They specifically, I think he got asked a question about why the over exaggeration on like shoulders and helms, and he talked about it all has to do, your art style kind of has to match your canvas, what it is that you're working on. And since it's such a pulled out view, everything has to be over the top, extremely exaggerated, so that way you can get a different silhouettes or different item shapes, so that way you can actually see your character progressing in gear. And so that's why some of the stuff just is like really out there. But we also got some hints into just kind of like the chaos that was going on in the early D3 development. This is something that I've talked about a lot on the show, over the years. Something that's just kind of like relatively well known is that D3 had a very, very troubled development, and that its development actually goes back to like 2001, 2002, when Lord of Destruction shipped with Blizzard North. But their project that they had been working on effectively was scrapped in 2005, following the mass kind of like exodus of the original Diablo North, the original Blizzard North developers, when they went to go through and form Flagship Studios. Eventually Blizzard North was closed, and all of those resources and stuff were pulled in-house, and that there was, kind of talk that in 2005 that there was a little bit of a reboot in terms of the development when Jay Wilson was brought on board. But apparently there was also, we now know that at least confirmed that there was another reboot, almost a total reboot of the game in 2007, where they threw out all the last elements of the Blizzard North vision of Diablo 3 and started something, about a year, maybe a year and a half, before the game was actually announced in 2008. So we can see that there was very little development that had been on the game before it was announced in 2008, and I want to say that's probably about like sitting where we're at with Diablo 4 right now, where it had been in development for a couple of years and had been, stopped and the development rebooted. And now here we are, maybe a year or two into the actual development of the game, before the game is announced. And so we're still a few years out. But they also talked about, or Trent talked about, a lot of the things that still continue to plague the development of the game, and that how, they were going on for like 4 years before they got the game to like a shippable state and did the beta, and a lot of the stuff that was that they wanted to go through and do, and that by the end of it they just wanted to finish the game and ship it. But there were some interesting things that I picked up in there. There was a ton of content that had gotten cut, like such as a whole act. Probably, he also mentioned Scovos was cut. He didn't say specifically what the act was, but I imagine that was probably the Scovos Isles was cut. But saying that it didn't add anything, and so these were things that were like early concepts, and I believe that was something that we heard before from one of Josh Mosquera's talks, is that like Scovos was an early concept in the game, but really wasn't working out, so it had gotten cut. I know that Ura, from that would have been further east from Chaldeum in the mountains, that was something that was a location that was shown in the announcement cinematic that they had played at the Worldwide Invitational back in 2008, but was apparently like that part of the game was already scrapped by the time that they had showed it off and had announced it. So they had done some early concept art for that zone, but it had been scrapped like really early, and so it's something that just happens in game development when it's not working out, or you're having issues trying to make it work within the grand scope of the game. It makes sense. Maybe you're going through and a game like Diablo 3, where you spent like 11 years in development in total, between multiple reboots, that eventually you just have to say enough's enough, and we have to push it, we have to get it out. But another one of the interesting ones was that there was like a Lucani caverns that they were gonna go through and do, where it would show kind of like a primitive Lucani village, but it would be vertical, and so you'd actually be kind of like climbing up a rock face in the middle of a canyon, and so it'd have a lot of verticality and such. And Trent was actually one of the ones that had worked a lot on that, in order to try and design elements or proof of concepts about how the game could work mechanically, and handling it with like moving platforms that will take you in between the different levels and such. But it was ultimately just it was too late, too little time left, and it had been scrapped. And I can't blame them, because go back and play Diablo 2 and do the Arcane Sanctuary. That one, especially depending upon what branch that you're going through and getting on, because in the Arcane Sanctuary, each one, there's the one that has the pillars, there's the one that has the stairs, there's the one that is mostly the teleports, and the one that's a bit more just flat and open. And some of the ones, especially the pillared ones, where it's like the tiered, that has a lot of the fake tiers to try and add verticality of the game, but it's just the level is still flat, but they put in just like art assets to make it look as if it is stacked on top of one another with well-placed stairs, in order to give a 2D environment a 3D look. But it didn't work that well. Maybe I can't even say that for the 2001 it was decent, it was great. No, I remember playing the game back on dial-up, and that area just sucked. It was it sucked for the two reasons. One, the summoner was always in the last of the 4 areas that you picked, so you had to clear out everything for nothing. And two, especially if you were like a pet class or you didn't have any type of movement, if you were a barbarian with leap, or if you were a sorceress with teleport, probably didn't affect you too much. But the other classes, yeah, you were boned, trying to get through some of those places. Pathing was terrible. You had mobs that would just like you had a whole bunch of ranged mobs, or mobs that can fly, and so they ignored the terrain and trying to go and attack them while they attacked you back. It just a lot of difficulties, a lot of just really annoying things. And so yeah, I can understand them, dropping like a verticality. If you're not going to dedicate a lot of time to it in order to make it work well, then it just becomes frustrating. And I definitely do not hold anything against the early D3 development team for going through and cutting verticality from it if it's not something that was going to have a lot of time dedicated to. And especially just what we saw, and all the updates that came so quickly for Diablo 3 after it launched. There was a lot of stuff that was kind of like left half done that they had to go and patch in and such. But just imagine, if they wanted to just get like that one zone done, how many extra months would it have added to the release? It's like obviously not worth it, as we see back with the Necromancer and Revive. Sadly, not worth it, unless of course we go and we have the season 21 and they actually do like a Revive set, which I would absolutely love. I want a Revive set, but I'm wish listing. We'll keep it back in. Trent also talked a little bit about like some of the design decisions between D3, or at least like comparing and contrasting between like D3 and D4. Because if you go through and you look at Diablo 3, they decided that it was going to be stylized. And so it has a very like oil painting look. A lot of the backgrounds are very stylized. It's obviously D3 has had a lot of criticisms about the art style over the years, especially in the early days. Not so much nowadays. But if you go back and you look at it, compare D3, to a bunch of other games that released in 2012. D3 looks a lot better than them. It is aged better than pretty much anything else that came out around that time, and is actually aged better than some of the games that have come out in between. And part of that is because it's one of the advantages of going for a stylized or a heavily stylized art style, is that if you're not going for realistic views and you're going for that stylization, it ages better. Because if you go for realism, the bar that's set for realism ever increases over time as technology gets better. And so if you go for something that wanted to be more like gritty and such, it's like, say, Diablo 2, go back and play it now. The game is not that good looking at all. It is a chore, and that is like a huge detriment for some of those older games. And it's or like the original StarCraft, having a Zergling attack something. The sprite is moving. There's movement, so I imagine that that's its talons that are going through and hitting the Space Marine. It's there's a lot of things that go into those considerations. And while his cup of tea was he likes doing the more stylized artwork, and so he's not really a fan. He would have gone a different way with Diablo 4 than what they're going for, because they're going for more of that gritty, realistic art style. But as we can see from the reception of the early D4 preview that we got at this last BlizzCon, that it seems that the majority of people are liking the direction that the art is taking. And they want that stylization and that stuff to come from the icon art. From what we've seen in a whole bunch of like Reddit posts and stuff like that. I know Mr. Llama is a very big proponent of that, and just like cutting out like the 3D model from the user interface. But then like, how are you really going to appreciate the amount of detail that's put into the artwork if you don't have like a 3D model to zoom in on? Because your character is going to be so small on the screen that you're not really going to be able to appreciate all of those differences. But it's also just something that he acknowledges that it's going to be difficult for Diablo 4, especially that if you're going to be going for more realistic style, you in order to make those tiers of gear different from one another, like how do you tell a mid-level item from a high-level epic? That you really have to work on what is it, the silhouette, like the armor silhouette, the base shapes. So that way you can tell the difference, and then you can go in and start adding detail like texture, color, and other things of that effect. And that when you go for a realistic art style, it makes those design decisions harder. And so they are taking a more of a hard route, and we'll see how it goes through and pays off. But if Diablo 4 is going to be more of a living game that they're going to expand upon, over time. You can look at something like, as I mentioned, the game World of Warcraft earlier. The game itself is still, of course, extremely heavy stylized, but even so, you can look at what the game and the models look like now versus what they looked like 10 years ago, or in this own like frame of reference 8 years ago when Diablo 3 launched, and it's a night and day difference between a lot of stuff. They've added a lot more articulation to the character models, NPCs, spell effects and such have all gotten much better in this. So there's a lot of things that you can go through and do even on a 15-16-year-old engine that you can go through and give it updates. Could we have Diablo 4 for 15-16 years? Probably not. But I could easily see another 8 years just like we got out of Diablo 3. I guess it's not even really pushing it that far if we look at the 12 years that Diablo 2 gave us. It all depends on the amount of content and the how engaged they manage to keep the players with it. And then, of course, one of the last things I just wanted to go through and touch on here for the episode is, of course, BlizzCon. We haven't had any official word on it, and Blizzard was looking, until I think in one of their posts they said or one of the things, maybe not in their post, but one of the rumors or things that I heard is that like June is the make or break date. And so it's like they pretty much have until like the early June to kind of decide whether they're actually going to hold a convention or not. And some of the comments that have been coming out of the Californian government is that they are potentially thinking about banning all mass gatherings until 2021. So if that is going to be in effect, that will cancel BlizzCon. So as of right now, even though it's still a long ways out with the way things are going, I actually, I'm at this point in time, after some of those comments, I'm really having heavy doubts there's going to be a BlizzCon this year. I'm definitely weighing more on the side that there probably will not be. And we'll find out more, as in the coming weeks and months. We will see. But it means that we might have to wait until 2021 for the next BlizzCon. I'm sure that if it does end up getting canceled, that BlizzCon is a huge marketing tool for not just Blizzard, but Activision Blizzard. And so if it does get canceled, there's still going to be a lot of content that they're going to go through, push out there. Within the age of Twitch, in the age of live streaming, it is so easy to do. And even just from the comfort of your own home, you should probably know, if you're listening to the show, I'm a big Warhammer fan. For Games Workshop, the company that owns and produces all the models for Warhammer, they have done a series of previews, because at conventions like Adepticon or GenCon and such, they'll have like little previews where they'll show off upcoming models or upcoming rule updates and such. And because all of those have been canceled, they've instead done little online previews. And they've done 3 so far. Some have been rocky, some have been awesome. But it also is kind of cool because you have like some of the the lead story writers, or some of the lead artists and concept artists and developers and rules writers and such that are going through and doing these previews, like literally from their own homes. You'll see their painting tables and the models that they're working on in the background and such, while still going through and having like the company provided B-roll footage in order to go through and play. And that, it's just, there's no reason why they can't do some big announcements, like Longshot saying in chat, like a virtual convention, I think would be pretty cool. Whether they'll still like put it behind a paywall, with the virtual ticket, I don't know. That one is starting to get a little bit greedy if they were to put it behind like a paywall or something along those lines. Maybe have like that opt-in where you can just pay for the cosmetic effects that you would have gotten for like the BlizzCon ticket, or the virtual ticket. I could see that, like, it's like $10, $20. How much are you willing to pay? Maybe a la carte. I don't want to buy the Heroes of the Storm banner, So I just want the D3 wings, give or take. Who knows? We might actually even have Diablo Immortal cosmetic stuff by BlizzCon, because we still have a regional test that's provided. That's supposed to be provided for the summer. As we go through and enter into summer, I guess we probably won't really get an update on whether that is still happening or not until August. I think is the next scheduled conference call or investors call from Activision Blizzard, which is where we learned about the regional testing, because the development team for Immortal is, of course, they're just very tight-lipped. Everything is under wraps until they're just ready to release it, and then it's just gonna be out there, and there'll be a very small marketing push like right before release. But until then, we really won't probably hear anything until the actual regional test itself starts. And with that, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about on this particular episode, so that's going to draw us to a close here. I do appreciate those of you that have came out to catch the episode live, and I'll go through and get this episode up on iTunes, Stitcher, and what have you in short order. If you wanna email any questions, comments or anything like that, please feel free at send me an email at westmarchworkshop@blizzpro.com. Again, that email is westmarchworkshop@blizzpro.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter at the WM Workshop in order to see when we go live. And of course, you can always follow me directly at Neinball Gamer on Twitter. Or twitch.tv/Neinball. I know I said that I might try and go through and stream. It just, it's even though I've been like no-lifing video games and such for while I've been out of work for the past couple of weeks, I just haven't felt like streaming. It's like I'm sitting there. It's like people don't want to see me in a tank top, like just sitting at a computer for 12 hours at a time. But we'll see. And again, thank you for joining me here, listening to the show. I appreciate you going through, and let me know how things are going. If there's anything that you want me to cover, in the next couple episodes, because I expect that will probably be the next 2 or 3 episodes will be more content light, as we won't really have a lot to talk about as far as news goes. So let me know. Until then, thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next time.